Okay, so I've finished gluing up the two halves of the mold, and I've jointed the edge that's going to join the two halves, and you can see them right here. So they fit together very nicely. And so before we go any farther, I need to talk about what kind of mold it is we're going to build. So there's a couple of different kinds that I make here in my shop, depending upon the guitar. So this is just a standard mold. This is a mold for a classical guitar. Nice and simple, where the two halves go right down the middle, and that's the easiest mold to make. The other kind is right over here. And this is a cutaway mold. So most of the guitars that I make are cutaways. And there's a difference here. This mold here, I actually built it wrong when I first made it, and I cut it down the middle. And since then I had to go glue a little piece on the end here. But a cutaway mold, the way that I make them now, down here at the butt of the guitar, that's right in half. But up here at the neck joint, I make one half of the mold break right at the cutaway. And there's a reason for that, because when you bend your side, you want that side to go right in. You can clamp it against the mold, and then later you can come and cut it off and fit the mold together. If the mold is built in halves, then it becomes much more difficult to deal with the cutaway while you're pulling it out of the bender. It's hot and it's trying to straighten back out, and you're trying to mess with cutting this piece and getting it to fit into the notch. So we don't do that anymore. So I make all my molds for a cutaway like this. Now the mold that I'm going to make today is going to be similar to a cutaway mold. It's not exactly a cutaway, but it's going to be similar to this. And so I'm going to have to offset the mold. And it's for a classical guitar. And so what I have to do is this offset here has to be half the width of your fingerboard right at the neck joint. So if your fingerboard, like a standard Martin, is about 2 1/4 inches at the neck joint, then you'd want to make the distance between this edge and the center 1 1/8. So you just need to be really careful about that. So for the classical mold that I want to make today, the width of the fingerboard right at the neck joint, which is at the 12th fret, is about 60 millimeters. So I want to go 30 millimeters over so that I hit that right in the middle. So let's go over here and I'll show you what we have to do. So I'm going to take this classical mold. In fact, I need to move this back a little farther so you can see the whole thing. So I'm going to use the classical mold that we were looking at just a few minutes ago. And it's not going to go just right half and half. I'm going to have to offset it 30 millimeters. Now I've made a couple of marks on the board here. So that's going to be 30 millimeters there. Now this side here is not going to end at the 30 millimeters. So what I have to do is put the other half on it. So when I make my tracing, I'm going to trace the non-cutaway side of the mold Let me find a pencil real quick. Here's one. Okay, so that sits at my 30 millimeter mark. So I can trace this side of the mold right there at my line. Trace that around. And I'm going to stop right there. Then I'll put the other half of the mold in here and bring that on around to the center. Okay, so you can see that the butt side of the guitar isn't going to be at the seam. It's going to be over by 30 millimeters. And this side up here, up at the neck joint, is going to go all the way to the seam. So when I go start cutting this out on the bandsaw, that is the side of the mold that I have to deal with. Now for the other side, I'm going to do basically the same thing. Only for this side, I'm going to adjust the position of the mold. I don't want it to come right to the same point. I want this side of the mold to come to the 14th fret. So I'm going to adjust that. And I'll measure that mark and adjust it, and then I'll redraw the other half of the mold here, and I'll show it to you in just a minute. Okay, so here we are. I've drawn this onto the two halves of the mold so you can see what's happening. This side here is the bass side, and I've taken the center seam and I'm going to move it over towards the bass by 30 millimeters. So here's going to be my new bass side, starting right at this line. It's going to come all the way around and then go on to the other side by 30 millimeters. Here's my new treble side. I want it to be offset, so it's not really quite like a cutaway, but it's just offset down by 2 frets. And so it just comes around like normal, and I had to redraw the upper bout to this side so that it came around and was symmetrical up to about this point. So I just had to redraw that piece there. And so now I'm going to go cut this, and it may be easier to see what's going on once I get this cut out and these two pieces mate together, and then you can really see what they're going to look like. So I'll go cut these out and be back in a few minutes.